This is Stories from the States. I'm Chris Fitzsimon. Today, we're talking about the Trump administration's aggressive enforcement of immigration rules and the violence that is following that. But we're also going to check in on how some communities are helping keep ICE in check, or trying to. In the days since January 7th, when Renee Nicole Good was killed by ICE agent Jonathan Ross in Minneapolis, the public is now getting a closer look at how many communities are resisting the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. The work has become increasingly risky as tensions soar, and yet even after Good's death, volunteers continue to mobilize in targeted neighborhoods. We'll check in with a Minnesota reporter who followed along. While over in Memphis, they were in the national spotlight when President Trump sent the National Guard to what he said was to, quote, clean up crime. A volunteer group continues to document ICE activity there and support those left behind in the immigration raids. In a moment, we'll chat with the member of Vecindarios 901 about their efforts. In September 2025, the Trump administration launched the Memphis Safe Task Force in what they said was an effort to combat violent crime in the city. The task force is made up of hundreds of state and federal law enforcement officers working in conjunction with local law enforcement. ICE and Border Patrol agents are also among them. In the frenzy of the sudden presence of federal law enforcement, Memphis community groups rallied together to document the arrest conducted by ICE and BPAs. One volunteer group called Vecindarios 901 operates a hotline for Memphis residents to both report immigration enforcement activities and support those left behind. The group, also known as V901, has said that ICE raids have only continued unabated. Carlos Ochoa is a volunteer with Vecindarios 901. He joins us now. Hi, Carlos. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, tell me what things are like in Memphis there in terms of this effort. One of the things that seems to happen is we have a lot of publicity nationally about a new city where activities are happening, and then the attention focuses on another place. What's happening in Memphis now?
Well, what's happening now is the same thing that's been happening since the task force has arrived. We see massive drag nets across our city, and we see they start releasing some figures about how 90% of all immigration arrests or detentions that are being made are originating from traffic stops. So we're seeing just a huge, what we would consider a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights.
And that data saying that almost 90% of immigration arrests by the Memphis Task Force were originating from traffic stops was from the Daily Memphian. Are these traffic stops like a roadblock, or are they targeting specific people or ethnicities?
They're not roadblocks, but in a city that's majority black, majority brown, they are using pretextual stops in order to stop people. And from our perspective, yeah, they are targeting black and brown neighborhoods. We've got some data to back that up. We're not really seeing the majority of these stops originating in predominantly white neighborhoods.
And what has this meant to the communities? What is life like now in these black and brown communities in Memphis with all this going on?
Well, it's scary for a lot of people. I will say Memphis has its problems. It's it's had a lot of problems throughout its existence. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated here. You know, that's a legacy that we live with. And people don't really feel the kind of investment from the state in the city. And there's not a whole lot of local legislative autonomy here either. So people don't feel safe. And so some people feel that the Memphis Safe Task Force is going to make this community safer. But what the reality is that the majority of the stops that the Memphis Safe Task Force is making are not violent criminals. The majority of the people who are being taken into federal immigration custody, they're not violent criminals. These are law-abiding people who love this country. And so no matter how you slice it, people are scared here.
Yeah, what does your day look like as a volunteer for V901? Tell us about that.
We're a rapid response hotline. We take calls from people who witness ICE's presence, and then we go to verify and observe. We're non-interventionists, but we do have legal observers to make sure that ICE is following the law and that people can feel safer in their own communities. Sometimes I take calls as a dispatcher, not very often, but the times that I do take calls, you're really hearing a lot of stories from people who are experiencing the worst crises of their lives. People are calling in to report that their father was being detained on his way home from work, and they don't know how to get in touch with him, and he has high blood pressure and he needs his medicine, and their people are really scared because they can't contact people. People who have been here for 30 years, who have children here, are being detained, and their families call trying to figure out like what is going on, where's their husband, where are their wives, where are their brothers and sisters. It's really truly heartbreaking, what's happening and the kinds of calls we're receiving.
People who don't follow this, when they hear somebody has been detained or arrested or picked up, whatever verb you want to use, I think some people still go back to their minds of, oh, they're in the county jail and I can go see them or I can get them a lawyer. But as you were just pointing out, it's not only that, but they don't even oftentimes know where they are, right? I mean, they have no way to know if they're even in Tennessee or Memphis or what part of the United States.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the federal processes for intake of these people who they're claiming are here without permission slips to be here, they make it really difficult for friends and loved ones to find them. Sometimes they misspell names of the people that they're detaining. They might transpose numbers on their birth year and all kinds of little pieces of information that are required in order to find someone. The federal government is really botching that. And so it makes it really hard to find where members of families are being detained. And so there's just a huge hole in families' lives who's, they've had their whole lives disrupted, torn apart. I mean, it's chaos. It's the worst of humanity.
ICE agents are targeting people who they think are immigrants. I imagine that's causing a lot of fear in immigrant communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And that might be part of the the intention of the federal government here is to instill some fear in the community. And we do receive those kinds of calls. People are not going to work. People are not going to doctor's visits. People are not going to the grocery store. People are not sending their kids to school because they're afraid that that might be the last time that they see them.
What's it been like for you doing this work and hearing these reports, seeing this happening? What goes through your mind? I know you're concerned and afraid for the welfare of others, but it must take a toll on you as well.
Yeah, this work is definitely not easy. And I think if you ask anyone who's doing this kind of rapid response work, they'll tell you that there's tremendous burnout. There's a lot of personal fear that comes along with this. There's a lot of like real big concerns about the future of this country and of our lives. But there's also a lot of joy in resisting. People sometimes might say, well, you got to find joy in order to resist. But what we've found, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people, not just in Memphis, but there is a lot of joy in resisting itself. You find community, you find connection, you find out what you really care about in your own personal life. And that's I think something that's not always talked about, but it is definitely true. And I think it helps kind of balance out some of those other negative feelings that we feel.
Is there anything that you would want folks who are listening to know about what's happening there in Memphis that you don't think that it has been appropriately covered or communicated?
Yeah, I think what's happening in Memphis is it needs to be on people's radar because they're using Memphis as a testing ground, as a blueprint for what is going to happen to the rest of the country. They are pressure testing the Constitution that working families across the country all rely on. And we need to pay attention to what's going on here because it really is a blueprint for what might happen elsewhere. And so we just need to keep our eyes on Memphis.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your information and your story with us. We really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
According to reporting from the Tennessee Lookout, Republican state lawmakers are planning to introduce immigration-related legislation crafted in collaboration with the White House and Homeland Security soon. To stay up to date on what's happening in Tennessee, you can visit newsfromthestates.com. While over in Minneapolis, residents there are looking for ways to push back against what many view as an occupation of the city by unwelcome federal forces. The effort to disrupt ICE operations has only grown in the days after ICE agent Jonathan Ross fatally shot Renee Nicole Good in her car. One way they're doing that is by driving around in immigrant neighborhoods and tracking where ICE agents are. Minnesota Reformer reporter Madison McVan got a chance to ride with the group on their patrol. According to her reporting, there are now at least 4 times more immigration agents in the state than there are Minneapolis police officers. We'll chat with her in a moment about what's going on there.
At a time when so many communities are losing their local news outlets, State's Newsroom is filling a gap. We are now the nation's largest state-focused nonprofit news organization, with reporters based in every state capital and Washington, D.C. But we can't do it without your support. Your contributions allow us to produce award-winning journalism and deliver it to you for free, no pop-ups, no paywalls. This is a crucial time to support local journalism, and every bit helps. To give, go to statesnewsroom.com/donate.
In early January, the Trump administration announced that 2,000 federal agents were being sent to Minneapolis to carry out a major immigration operation. Tensions, as you'd imagine, were high between federal agents and community members. Then, on January 7th, Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed in her car by an ICE agent, Jonathan Ross, in Minneapolis. By now, you have surely seen the video and maybe heard the efforts of the Trump administration to actually blame Good, alleging she was trying to run over Ross. However, independent analysis of the videos don't support those claims. Since her killing, protests have erupted across Minnesota and around the country to remember Good and to call for an end to the Trump administration's aggressive tactics toward immigrants. Many local community members are leading a movement to disrupt ICE operations, and more are joining them. Minnesota Reformer reporter Madison McVan followed along with one of those groups. The Minnesota Reformer is an outlet of State's Newsroom. Madison, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us sort of what's happening now in the Twin Cities.
We're seeing high concentrations of immigration agents, particularly in immigrant-dense neighborhoods and areas where immigrant-owned businesses are operating. These response groups, as you mentioned, are tracking their movements. They are alerting neighbors when ICE is present. And so we're seeing kind of isolated skirmishes all over the city and the metro area as this is going on.
Yeah, I've actually seen some of the videos that have been posted online and read the Reformers' coverage. It does seem like occasionally there'll be flare-ups. I've seen tear gas. I've seen people being pulled out of cars. What is it like in those immigrant communities now, just day to day?
Well, lots of immigrants have opted to shelter in place. So the people who are fighting the ICE agents a lot of times are citizens who have basically taken it upon themselves to say, our immigrant neighbors are getting targeted and it's on us to go out and fight them because, if immigrants are people who these agents think look or sound like immigrants, they might be at higher risk going outside.
For you who were sort of immersed in covering this so intensively, but for folks who aren't there, it's so shocking. Not only was Renee Good killed outside of school, but I keep seeing reports of these activities near schools, near community centers. So it seems like it's disrupting every part of a daily life if you can't drop your kid off at school.
Right. And Minneapolis public schools have now offered students the option to take classes online for about a month, and that could possibly be extended. We're seeing parents whose kids go to the same school organize to patrol the outside of schools during pickup and drop off times or escort parents or teachers to and from school if those parents and teachers are immigrants who are worried about getting picked up by ICE on their way to or from school.
Well, tell us about your story. I want to dive into that some and maybe then get back to some more larger questions. Tell us about the group that you were riding with or how this whole came about.
Yeah, I think it helps to back up a little bit in time. When Trump took over for his second term, people who opposed his immigration agenda started getting together, thinking about how to take action to prevent the mass deportation campaign that Trump was advocating for. The main solution that people landed on was something called rapid response networks. So that involved getting in touch with your neighbors, creating some kind of a group chat, and then notifying each other if ICE was spotted in the area so that neighbors could come out, protest, record, possibly inform someone who's being detained of their rights. that kind of thing. But what quickly happened is, as ice raids happened throughout 2025, particularly the bigger ones, where it's dozens of agents and they surround a business and they kind of do a sweep of the inside. So many people were responding to these ice raids, it was causing big clashes between law enforcement and protesters. So now, with this big surge in immigration agents arriving in the cities, they're taking different tactics. The ICE agents are getting in and out quickly, they're working in smaller groups, they're taking one or two people at a time and getting out of there before these rapid response groups are able to respond. So now the people who were in those rapid response groups are taking a more proactive approach. They're following the ICE vehicles so that if the agents get out, they can start recording immediately. In other words, they can be there before the arrests happen and try and discourage those arrests or disrupt the operation in legal ways, such as making lots of noise, shouting at the agents, and again, informing neighbors that ICE is present.
And so, how did you come to ride along with this operation recently?
I've been on the ground covering this for a while, and after the death of Renee Good, I responded straight to that scene. I stayed on the site of the shooting until the vigil was held that night and afterwards, just meeting a lot of people who were wanting to take some kind of action, who were feeling very upset by the shooting and feeling like they needed to do something about the presence of ICE agents in the Twin Cities. Our photographer, Nicole Neary, was there. She was actually the one who set up the ride along. But, we met with some of these folks in person, and they decided that they were willing to take us along for a ride and willing to put their names and their faces on this story. Ultimately, they felt that what they're doing is right.
Well, both your writing and Nicole's pictures were just amazing, and I wonder, tell us what it was like. Some of those pictures are haunting.
Well, it's a little anxiety inducing, in part because, we're in the back seat. We're observers and we're not making decisions, right? It's up to these people to decide how far they're willing to push these ICE agents, knowing that they could possibly face retaliation. So it's certainly a little stressful. Your adrenaline gets pumping a little bit when federal agents surround the car and start threatening arrest to the people inside. But ultimately, we didn't get arrested.
What do they threaten arrest for? Is it obstructing or interfering with the federal agent? Is that the crime?
Yeah, that's the language they use. They say you're obstructing us. Now, of course, the legal definition of obstruction is something that's being argued about in court right now with regards to these tactics. But legal experts say generally following a law enforcement vehicle, honking a horn, even yelling at an officer is not obstruction. Now, physically blocking an agent with your car, with your body, from making an arrest is obstruction, and that's illegal. But I didn't see any of that happening when I was out.
Were the officers yelling at the drivers? I mean, at this point, when they came up to the windows?
Yeah, and from everything I saw, it's clear that the agents are trying to intimidate the people who are following them. Because these people are not breaking the law. I mean, some of them have been arrested in the act, but not charged. Intimidation is one of the tactics that agents are using to discourage this kind of behavior. So, in one instance, I was in the car while these observers were following along a convoy of ICE vehicles. It was three ICE vehicles, and we were in the car directly behind them. The agents pulled into a side street, stopped their cars, blocking the observers' car's ability to proceed. The agents got out, surrounded the vehicle, and one came up to the window and sort of lectured. He wasn't really shouting, but he was speaking strongly, telling the observers, stop following us. You're obstructing us. We're going to keep moving and turn the corner. And if you follow us, we're going to have to take you out of the car and arrest you. He got back in the car. The observers looked at each other and said, you know what? We're not breaking any laws. Let's keep following him. So the ICE vehicles move forward. The observers keep following them. And it soon becomes apparent that the ICE vehicles are driving to the observer's house. And sure enough, they arrive in front of the observer's house and they stop, seeming to indicate, we know where you live. They stayed in the car at that point, and the observers again looked at each other and said, let's just keep following them. Let's wait for them to leave. The convoy takes off, and the two cars in the front split off, and then the observers kept following the third vehicle for a few minutes. And then after a while, they realized this vehicle is just returning back to the ICE headquarters. We can let it go and circle back to Minneapolis. At that point, the observer, whose home the agents had driven to, got a call from her wife saying that agents had showed up and knocked on the door while the observers were following the ICE vehicle back to the headquarters.
Wow.
So that was a new tactic that we witnessed. It's just a cat and mouse game, really, a dark and dangerous one, where it feels like both sides are antagonizing each other to see how far they can take it.
Do you think these observers, I mean, do they realize they're in danger as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are asking themselves right now what exactly they are willing to risk for this movement. They've thought hard about that question. Lots of them have decided they're willing to be arrested. Some of them have been arrested for this. There's, of course, always the threat of something like a Renee Good situation happening.
Right. Well, I wanted to circle back to that. You mentioned that you went to that scene, and I wondered if you could tell us what that was like. Not so much what happened, because we've seen that as hard as it is to watch. But what was the feeling on the scene there? The other folks who were around. What was the reaction overall?
When I first arrived, maybe about an hour after the shooting had occurred, people were angry because ICE was still on the scene. So at that point, it had been long enough that a crowd had gathered. They knew that ICE had shot someone and they were protesting the agents that were still on the scene. As the ICE agents left, they deployed tear gas and pepper spray on protesters in a residential area. And then Minneapolis police, Hennepin County sheriffs, the FBI, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension secured the scene after the ICE agents left. And then after that, there was still some protesting of law enforcement. People were concerned that Minneapolis police were collaborating with ICE by securing the scene. But as the day went on, it really just shifted into a somber mood as people started to gather around the site of where the shooting occurred after the crime scene was kind of cleared and reopened to the public. People started placing flowers in the snow where you could still see the blood, bringing notes, cards, whistles, which observers are using to alert people of ICE's presence, chanting, singing, and then there was a more formal vigil that evening.
Is the city must still be on edge?
It is on edge, but right now the conflicts are very much concentrated in the immigrant heavy areas. They're not exclusive to those areas, but I also think there's a lot of people who live in the more affluent areas of the city, who live in the suburbs and commute into downtown to go to work, who can probably pass through the city without seeing what's going on. But when you start to spend time in some of these neighborhoods, you realize that ICE is everywhere. They really are.
What would you want people who are listening to know about this whole episode, not just the shooting, but the tension and the really trauma that's happening to an American city now?
I think when you spend time in these cities, and again, you see ICE almost constantly, you understand why a lot of people view this as an occupation of an American city. And what I found most powerful being out there was the sheer number of people who mobilized anytime they saw an ICE agent. It was really astounding the level at which people who live in these neighborhoods have decided they don't want ICE there. They have decided to yell at the agents, to honk their car horns, to record them, to do their best to intimidate ICE back because they believe ICE is intimidating their neighbors. And so I think what people might not understand is the level to which that kind of resistance and that opposition has really permeated throughout the city, particularly in these areas where ICE is hitting them pretty hard.
Well, thank you so much for all your great reporting. Please be safe yourself, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Since we recorded our conversation with Madison, the Minnesota reformer has reported that a second person was shot by a federal immigration agent in Minneapolis. Scores of demonstrators showed up at the scene, shouting expletives at federal agents and telling them to get out of Minneapolis. Federal agents deployed tear gas and flashbangs, while some protesters shot fireworks at law enforcement. To stay up to date on what ICE is doing in Minnesota and across the states, you can visit newsfromthestates.com. Coming up shortly, Evening Wrap newsletter writer Danielle Gaines will join us with the top stories she's looking out for, and with one last thing.
Hi, it's Nell Dunlap, Product and Engineering Director at States Newsroom. At States Newsroom, we believe journalism should be fair, fearless, and free. With reporters working on the ground in all 50 states and Washington, D.C., we provide nonpartisan coverage of the state issues that matter most to you. You can subscribe to our work by going to statesnewsroom.com/subscribe.
Well, here comes our favorite part of every week on Stories from the States, our chat with Evening Wrap newsletter writer extraordinaire Danielle Gaines. Danielle, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, considering the events of the world and the week.
Yes, it's been a rough one.
It certainly has. Tell us what has caught your eye.
We had a story this week out of North Carolina about the shortage of school psychologists and kind of the hardship that that's creating. So, for the last few years, there are more than a dozen school districts in the state that have operated without a school psychologist. These are staff members who are specially trained to provide special education evaluations, but then they also help with preventative and emergency health services. And national guidelines recommend one school psychologist for every 500 students. In North Carolina, the number is more near above 1,900. So we had stories of districts who have children in crisis and are waiting for help from outside of their boundaries. This can take days, it can take weeks, it can take hours. And most of those districts that are having real trouble with the hardships are in rural areas where you've got other issues that are compounding. So high poverty, limited infrastructure. It was a really interesting story and pointed out an area where the state really needs to improve.
Yeah, and even 1 in 500 seems like a lot, even though that's the guideline.
Yeah, it talked a little bit about like the lived experience of people who go into this work and what they were hoping to do and what's really actually possible given the time and funding constraints.
Okay, what about something coming up that you noticed?
Well, I have my eye on a number of reproductive rights issues right now. So obviously this has been a big concern since Roe versus Wade was overturned and with renewed Republican control in D.C. So this week in Louisiana, the Attorney General obtained an indictment for a California doctor who sent abortion pills into the state, or is alleged to have sent. She asked the governor to sign an extradition warrant for that. Pretty clear that California authorities won't cooperate. And at the same time, I think even on the same day, we published a story out of DC where lawmakers and advocates are pressing for more information about an ongoing Food and Drug Administration review of these common medications.
Yeah, it seems like that's the next frontier in the abortion rights debate.
That, and then obviously there are court battles as well. So the Missouri ban is in court right now in a 2-week trial. The outcome of that will affect access for women in pretty much all of the Midwest. So everyone's keeping their eyes on that as well.
Absolutely. Well, what about the favorite? One last thing.
Yeah, so the Nebraska legislature has had a rough time recently. They were about to take a vote to expel a member, so it's kind of unprecedented tumult. But there was a little bright spot in the Capitol this week. The state swore in its first ever kid governor. So this is Charlie Couch. She is a 5th grader, and she was elected by her peers in a statewide campaign, and she was sworn in. She got to come to the Capitol. There was lots of pomp and circumstance. The other children who ran for the office are now her cabinet, and they're all going to work together on issues that they think are important and highlight a more youthful voice behind policies.
If only she were the real governor, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe she will become one. Who knows?
That's right. We can only hope. Well, Danielle, thank you as always for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Stories from the States. I'm Chris Fitzsimon. Mallory Chang produced and edited this podcast. David Singer produced our theme music. If you liked what you've heard today, please leave a rating and review. It means a lot to hear what you think about our podcast. To stay up to date on the latest episodes, please subscribe now to Stories from the States, a podcast from States Newsroom, available wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll talk to you soon.